Alright, good evening, everybody. So, yes, I do gig work. Um, Hang on a sec. I'll grab my device. Alright, I was not prepared for this. So, anyhow, yes, I do gig work. It's not my full-time career, and that's probably true, many other people who do that line of work. In my case, as I've said in some of my other videos, uh, my three go-tos, were Roadie, Uber Eats, and DoorDash. I've yet to try Grubhub, um, but when it comes to the whole gig work, you know, there's ups and downs with it. The last video I was watching was on a channel, Mr. Pedro Bedonia Santiago, and obviously he's doing very well with it. Along with his YouTube channel. So great, it's working for him. Could it work for me? Possibly. I'm not putting my eggs, in a basket for that one. And there's a lot of points that he makes. Because essentially gig work is a 1099 position. In some ways you are your own boss, but in other ways, you're still working for a company. You know what I'm saying? And you're still making somebody rich. Even if you're a YouTuber, you're making somebody else rich. I think the only way you really work for yourself is if you have your own company. In which case you're working for your customers. So you never truly work for yourself unless you win the fucking lottery. But the state wants their piece of the pie. But anyhow, you're always making somebody else rich, whether you work at W-2, whether you do gig work or both, or you work two jobs. Which I'm not going to get into that in this video. That's another topic in of itself. Now, obviously, in my experience, with this line of work, different ones work better at different periods of the day. I mentioned this before, but I'll mention it again. Roadie, for example, the big gigs, they're the ones that come during the day. And usually you start seeing them pop up, mid-late morning. You get your Walmart, $100, Best Buy $80, PetSmart anywhere from like $30 to $70. Tractor Supply, that could range. They all have a wide range. Right now, the only one I'm seeing is a airport one. This is through Roadie, and I actually did one, and obviously. You got to do the whole submit receipt for parking, all that crap, so that's a whole another issue for another video. But as I've said this before, you can look and see which ones that you think are worth it. And on a side note, I actually try to see a pharmacy gig too, and while those don't pay much, and of course you got to drive to the place. But CVS ones, they pop up all over the place. It's kind of like pings from Uber Eats or DoorDash. Now, of course, with the CVS one, the pharmacy ones, you got to do them right there and then. That's just the way it is. And Roadie also has what they call XD gigs, where you go to a warehouse, and they have a different set of regulations. I tried one of those. But again, that's the way Roadie works. And what the gentleman I was referring to, didn't talk about, but other channels have, is that you're gonna get your slow times. You know, you're gonna get your slow times, so you might make, at least my own personal experience, you know, $80 in a day. You know, whether I do one, um, or do a hybrid system, which I've done, um, do a roadie gig, knowing you're gonna get X amount of money. You know, I'll throw $60 for the roadie gig, X amount of deliveries. I complete that one, and then I fire up, you know, Uber Eats or DoorDash, and then do the rest and make the money that way. You know, and if I have enough left in the tank, pun intended, you know, I just leave it on the balance and just let them pay it out, so I don't have to pay, you know, a fucking cash off fee. Now I know DoorDash, you know, I guess has their own Crimson card, and you know, I'm kind of, speaking of which, I gotta fucking yank that out. I made a mistake with doing a shop and pay. I thought the Crimson card was like the shop and pay payment card that you use. It's not. So again, you know, so I had that issue, you know, the whole, you know, half pay thing. So I was like, all right, whatever. But you know, again, let's see if I can actually fish it out of here. I think I might already have. I might already have fished it out because it's not even active. Well, there it is. I'm just gonna leave that right here. I'll probably fucking take a Dremel to it and just turn it into dust. Because you know, I don't use it, so that's that. But you know, again, it's basically you know, another thing they utilize to make money. You know, cause it's a financial, just like, you know, my auto insurance also has their own blah blah blah. You know, everybody wants to make money, and everybody wants a piece of the pie. Um, but you know, what he does bring up, and obviously, like I said, you know, he's obviously doing very well with it. That he probably has enough in the tank that he could just decide he doesn't want to work one particular day, you know, and just, you know, fuck off the whole day. Um, I'm not in that, you know, position to where I can do that. Now, obviously, you know, my last Uber delivery, you know, a police officer tried to flash his blues. So obviously that customer wasn't getting his delivery. And you know, it was just, that's just how it was. Like, I'm not going to get into details. They pulled me over. They had a reason, whatever. I had to deal with that while Uber support was on the phone. So, and you know, Uber support, you know, they were, I have that, or I have Uber set up towards recording my entire trip. So I no longer need to use the body cam or an nanny cam for that. You know, and again, you know, that's probably because customers were saying they didn't get their shit or whatever. And, you know, they have to game the system like that so they can get free food. But, you know, that's one advantage to that, is that it records it for the entirety of the trip. And, you know, what I'm saying for delivery, it also applies to ride shares, because, you know, that's another line of gig work, you know, is ride shares. You know, and that's obviously Uber's bread and butter is the ride shares. You know, and I think delivery is something that they do on the side. You know, for those who don't have vehicles to meet the criteria. Now with Uber, whether you do deliveries or ride shares, you got to put in your vehicle, you know, because that's just how it works, right? And it has to meet certain criteria. And what Uber used to do, and they haven't done this in a fucking while, which is, you know, bullshit, is they would offer, you know, the flat rates, you know, the 18 and some change an hour while you're doing deliveries. And I'd be like, fuck yeah, I'm signing up for that. You know, that way I know we're going to get that money. So, obviously, you know, right now, it's just fucking advertising me to fucking pick people up, and I don't want to pick people up. So, we go to DoorDash. You know, and DoorDash works, you know, in a similar fashion, but it puts what you call zones, and the red zone, that also means it's busy. The grayed out areas mean there's too many drivers. So I'm not going to sit there and claim a spot or any of that. I mean, it's also 10 o'clock at night. So that's obviously how that works. Grubhub, that works very similar. So you just have to, you obviously have to sit there and understand how the each one of them works, and they all work very differently. Grubhub is saying unavailable. I can turn on saying taking offers. So DoorDash and Grubhub have a little bit more flexibility because a lot of people who do those two, they don't have cars. They probably do like in the inner city where they live in. They probably have like a scooter or whatever. Now, Roadie, on the other hand, obviously you need a vehicle. And in my case, it's my Santa Cruz. That's registered. And that's the one that I have to use. And I've had issues with working the app, much like I did with the other two. But once you really learn and understand it, that's where you can make it work for you, and you're not bitching about how long gigs take. But again, in this line of work, you can have facts that beyond control. Like in my case, I was doing an Uber delivery, and because it was ice cream, obviously that customer was like, "Can you make mine priority?" And well, I can only do what the app tells me to do. It's just the way it works. Unfortunately, it's kind of bullshit because that same day it was telling me to get the ice cream, then go to Home Depot and pick up stuff for some other customer, and then it had it laid out to go, and that's also when I got pulled over by the police. And again, that was that customer wasn't getting their food, so not much I can do about that. So I did get the payout, because Uber support put two and two together, and I got free ice cream. That wasn't my intent or anything, but again, there's that traffic, and that can certainly affect the payout, because you're losing money when you get stuck in traffic. This is true whether you're doing Roadie, Uber Eats, etc. Like case in point, I'll use Roadie as an example. I take a $60 gig. Let's say it has 7 deliveries, and in between delivery number 3 and 4, there's a fucking 28-car pileup. That's gonna that means I'm gonna lose money. And one of my workarounds is I may pause the Roadie gig and just go fuck off somewhere and just have lunch, knowing I'm losing money anyways, and I don't want to lose money sitting in fucking traffic. Or I can go to some other area, again, pause the Roadie gig, message the board saying, hey, traffic, all that stuff. Go to some other area and just fucking bang out some Uber Eats, and then hopefully the accident clears, or just fucking kind of work around, and get the other ones out. Or worst case, just create a return gig. So there's certain workarounds that you can do, to make these work for you. And you just have, again, just like Pedro Bedoni, you just got to find what works for you. And again, a lot of people who do this, they have a W-2 job, and obviously the W-2, you have your schedule, all that crap. We all know that, and we all know there's ups and downs to either or. And one thing he does address, and I'm sure he has addressed this in some of his other videos, and many other drivers have as well. You get bad ratings. You get punished for using the platform. You decline orders. You get punished, and you may not get those orders. And then I'm over here like, now that I have a few different apps that I can use, I give less fucks about acceptance rates or any of that. Like, let me fire up Uber Eats and see what it's actually pinging. It's probably not going to ping anything now because it's doing this 10 o'clock, but I just fired her up just to kind of see what it says. You know, I'm not in a hot zone or anything. I'm in my fucking room. But, you know, it's funny, when I did some of my other videos, I wasn't getting any pings. And sure enough, I turn on my camera and then I get a fucking ping. And, you know, usually some like shitbox ping. So I'm going to get into that in a little bit. You know, as I've just in some of my other videos, you know, you got your mileage and what it's paying, and, you know, the federal reimbursement is 70 cents a mile. So you really got to look at that too as well before you hit accept. And yeah, obviously I'm not going to get any pings right now because, you know, like I said, I'm at home doing this video, you know, just kind of explaining, you know, my methodology to making it work. And there's no guarantee with it either. I mean, that's why they call it gig work. You know, like with Roadie, you know, it posts all the available gigs in, you know, in the area. You can pick and choose which ones you want to do, but it doesn't mean you're going to get it. And obviously, if you show up with the wrong kind of vehicle, you know, then yeah, you could be locked, because that, like any other company, they're expecting you to do a job. Yeah, turn this fucker off. Yeah, acceptance rate of 26%. I really don't give a fuck. DoorDash. I'm waiting for my DoorDash, you know, the red card, you know, the one they use for the shopping pays. So once I get that and get that figured out, I'll give it another try, maybe see if I can, you know, reevaluate my opinion on those. You know, because I can slightly understand from the customer's perspective, you know, why they do it that way. You know, because, you know, they want to save money too, because you actually pay more for the stuff when you do it through an app. You know, and I kind of get it, you know. They want to make money too. You know, they're providing a convenient service, you know, for the customer. You know, hence, I want to order spicy chicken sandwich flavored coffee. The cafe sells it for like $5.25. Ordered through Uber, and it might be something like $6.50 or whatever. I'm just throwing numbers out there, okay? So it's another convenience factor. You know, and you know, I'm not going to get a, you know, tip betas or anything like that. There's enough noise on that. I haven't had any. I think I might have had one or two experiences like that, but it wasn't really anything worth bitching about. You know, because, you know, I understand how it works. You know, they ping it. They say plus expected tip. You know, some customers won't tip. Blah blah blah. That's not the point of this video. There's enough of that. You know, I just do them, hope for the best, and then go about my day. The package deliveries for Uber, those actually pay pretty well for what you're doing. You know, and those are people who actually need to get something to someone else that very same day. In fact, one of them was actually kind of funny because it was somebody's car keys. You know, they didn't have their car keys, so I get to pay, you know, it was some stupid ass, like $10 for me to fucking bring somebody's car keys over to them. You know, in fact, the other funny one was somebody else paid me fucking $10 to deliver a fucking 20-ounce bottle of fucking Pepsi. It was Pepsi or Coke. It was one of the soft drinks from a 7-Eleven. I think the distance was like 12 miles or whatever, maybe 13 miles, whatever. $10, and I'm looking at them like, yeah, they're probably gonna fucking cancel. But they didn't cancel. I bought them the product, and they fucking tipped me. So it's like, fuck it, you know. You know, so, you know, again, it's a very interesting line of work, and, you know, again, you know, some people may do it full time and they make it work for them. And if they're making enough bank to actually make it work for them, you know, to where they're not bitching and moaning about the wear and tear in your car or any of that crap. Not to mention the road infrastructure, which I've covered in a previous video. You can see that video of how the current road infrastructure, is not set up to handle all these extra drivers doing gig work. But again, I've already covered that. Um, and obviously, again, you're gonna have your slow times. So that could be the one con. And I've had this happen where, I stop at like 9 o'clock in the morning, right? Get up, do my morning routine, shower, shit, all that crap. And then I'm like, you know what? I'm just gonna go to the area, hang out, chill, fire them up, see what's out there, and just see what happens. And again, if I get a good roadie gig, that'll be my main bread and butter. And then whatever I do after that, depending on the size of the roadie gig, that'll be, extra spice and extra cinnamon or whatever, roadie, cheese pizza, Uber Eats, or DoorDash, whatever I do after, if I decide to do so, be like, extra topping, peppers, pepperoni, whatever, that's just how I break it down. Now, again, like I said, I may not actually get any of the pings I submit offers to with a roadie, because it's also a dog-eat-dog world. And again, where Uber DoorDash are sending you the pings, like boom, boom, delivery, you can accept or decline. And obviously, a lot of these people who do this, myself included, we're not relying on just one app. In fact, it's funny. I actually heard about Roadie when I was, playing chess on my phone, because everything's ad-based, right? So every once in a while, you might see something that might actually be useful. We all get frustrated with all the ads, but every once in a while, so I just took a look at it and I was like, fuck it, I'll try it, And my comparison between my comparison between those three is that, obviously, with Roadie, you may be driving the most miles, doing the most work, for the least pay overall on average, based on all the gigs that I've done. But you're going to get that money, and you don't have to worry about tip betas or any of that shit. You just have to make sure your vehicle can, handle whatever it is that you're delivering. Or your account may be locked. But yeah, I know they also, I don't know if they're actually going, but I'd rather not find out. Thank you very much. In fact, it's funny, the last roadie gig I did, it was a Walmart gig. 2 heavy items. They were like shelving units that you put together, kind of like what IKEA sells. They were about 5 feet long. Now, I have a Santa Cruz with a 4-foot bed, but it's a truck, so I have these things called bungees and straps that I can use to secure the load. And it's funny, the guy next to me had a Tacoma. He had a smaller item. So it's funny, we're like looking at each other, I'm like, his gig made more sense for mine and vice versa. So, but I digress. The other con, and I forgot to mention this, is that where I was delivering it to was like one of those apartment complexes with no elevators. So yes, I had to schlep 2 50-plus pound items that are irregularly shaped up a flight of stairs to the 4th floor. That was not fun, But I'm like, you know what? I did it. That's that. That's the nature of the work. And, there was that one. Then there was the double gig at the airport. And, of course, that was heavy stuff, too. People's luggage. So I'm just like, yeah, I think after all that and, working a city job, taking out trash, my body needed a bit of a break. So sometimes, yeah, you just have to listen to your body as well. So that's the final thought for this video. You have to listen to your body. If your body's telling you you need a break, then just take a fucking break. Just take a fucking break. You know, that way you're not like stressing yourself out, making a bad decision while operating a motor vehicle, or any of that. You know, anyhow, that's just a little bit of my interpretation of gig work. You know, if you can see past, you know, the hiccups and all that stuff, it might actually work out for you. You know, if you're happy with your full-time job, you know, you do it on the side, then yeah, great. Anyhow, I'm gonna get ready to have some food, wind down, and give my body an even bigger break. I'll talk to you.